All right, let's do it. We got a lot of ground to cover, everybody. We are on Tesvav Amid Aleph, about 3/4 of the way down, about 10 lines before the wide lines at the end of the line where it says Moshe Kosav Sifro. So again, that's about 3/4 of the way down on Tesvav Amid Aleph, Moshe Kosav Sifro. Just to give you our plans for tonight, we're going to be learning about 2/3 of the way down to Tes Zayin Amid Aleph. And then tomorrow night, we're going to, Mirz Hashem, get to the Perek, which is a very big undertaking. I hope we can pull it off. And then that would be Thursday. And then David's going to be spearheading Daf Yomi on Shabbos, which will take us, I didn't forget about it, which will take us through Daf Yud Ches. Baruch Hashem, I gave you a nice one. Yud Ches and Midvez is 15 lines. So get started. We are in the middle of an Agadata, and today we're going to be focusing exclusively on Eov. Eov is a fascinating character as it relates to Jewish history. As we'll soon see, there are shitas that he lived in the times of Moshe, there are shitas that he lived in the times of Yaakov, there are shitas he lived in the times of Mitzrayim, and there are shitas that he didn't exist at all. So we'll see Machlokas Tanaim about him. Was he just the parable for dealing with the difficulties of life, or was he actually a real person? But let's start with some of the basics first. Moshe Kosev Sifro uParshas Bilam v'Eov. Moshe, we had said earlier in the Brisa yesterday, the Moshe wrote the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. He wrote Parshas Bilam and he wrote Sefer Eov. And the Gemara picks up on this because if Moshe wrote about Eov, what does that say about Eov's existence? If he lived at the times of Moshe. Misayeh Alei the Rav Levi Bar Lachma. The Amar Rav Levi Bar Lachma Eov b'mei Moshe Haya. Ksiv hachami tene fov yichtavun milai. This is a pasuk from Eov, which uses the word Efo, and there's a pasuk in Shemos that uses the language of Efo, and we therefore assume that because Moshe said an Efo and Eov said an Efo, just because of the word affiliations, feels a little tenuous, doesn't feel a little weak, but nevertheless, the Gemara says we see the word Efo, we can make a Gzera Shava. Then the Gemara is like, look, if you're going to play with the word Efo, then listen to all of my following 5 questions.
The only thing I'll say is it seems like an extra word. I don't even know how to translate it.
Yeah.
How will I know? Right.
Even in like more poetic modern Hebrew, you see it as well.
So maybe that's.
I think Rav Volba uses it sometimes.
Really?
I'm really sure. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Kind of like.
It is a little extraneous, but as the following questions are going to be posed, you'll see that question may well fall away. Ve'ema bimei Yitzchak. D'chsiv mi efo hu hatzod sayid. Ve'ema bimei Yaakov d'chsiv im kain efo zo sasu. Ve'ema bimei Yosef d'chsiv efo heim roim. So if you're going to play the game or the word game, we've got a lot of words to play with. The Torah is very big. So if you're raya that Eov lived in the days of Moshe from the word efo, I could argue that it's not necessarily true. The Gemara says lo salka daitach. We can have no habamina that Eov lived at any other time. D'chsiv mi tain b'sefer v'yochku. This is a pasuk in Mishlei. V'yuchaku, and this pasuk uses the word chok. Moshe hu de'ikre mechokek. We know from the end of the Sefer Torah, the very last couple of aliyahs, it refers to Moshe as a mechokek. D'chsiv hayare shislo kisham chelkas mechokek. Sapuna reference to Moshe. So because it's really a double reference, it's both efo and v'yuchaku mechokek, and therefore it has to be that Moshe lived in the times of that Eov lived in the times of Moshe. Kachazeh. Rava Amar that they lived a little bit later. Rava Amar. Eov bimei meraglim haya, ksiv hacha ish haya be'eretz Utz. Eov shemo, he lived in a place called Utz, and uchsiv hasam hayesh ba'etz from Parsha Shlach just a couple of weeks ago. Utz and eitz, and therefore we see that from the word association that we therefore can assume that he lived in the times of the meraglim. So says Rava. It's a little bit interesting because the previous Marim. Oh no, sorry, that question's not valid. I'll just ignore it. Second of the wide lines, mi dami. How can you compare these two? Hacha Utz. Hasam eitz, it's not the same word. Says the Gemara, yeah, but it kind of is. This is what Moshe said to the Jewish people. Yeshno le'oso adam, this particular man, referring to Eov, sheshnosav aruchos ke'etz umagin al doro ke'etz. So the word is being used in a double form, and enough for us to make the comparison to assume that he lived in the times of the Meraglim.
There's also Utz all the way back in British.
What's a pasuk? I hear you. Good question. What happens when you know Tanakh?
I know that.
Okay.
Happens could be one of my favorite because it just sounds.
Yeah. I don't know text. That's very good. Yeah, if we're just looking at Shorashim, then you're right. That's a very fair question. And then the well-known Shita, Yosif Ahume Rabbanon Kame de Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmeni, Yosif Kamar Eov Lo Haya, Velo Nivra, Elo Mashal Haya. The well-known Shita, which the rabbi said in front of Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmeni, Amar Le, Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmeni said back to these people. Notice that the Gemara did not say who said it. The Gemara kind of like, let's leave this as Mr. Anonymous. I don't know if that's why it happened, because we have had other presentations like this in Shas many times. Don't know. Amar Le, the Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani said back, Alecha Amar Kra Ish Haya Be'eretz Utz Io Shemo. What are you talking about? He's like, it says his name and it says where he's from. That's not a mashal. That's data. That's information about someone who lived. When you're making a mashal, you don't say his street address. You just don't do that. Like, your mashal could be without that, and the mashal is not detracted in any way, shape, or form. So Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, how can you say Lo Haya Velo Nivra? That doesn't make sense. We have the city he lived in. We have his name. Elamayata. After all, what do we know? L'rash ein kol ki im kivsa achas ketana asher kana v'yichya. Here, this is a mashal that Nasan Hanavi gave to David after David was courting Bathsheba. Bathsheba's husband Uriah they were married. Okay, he was sent to war and he had to get out tonight. We learned this sugya a while back. So here the Gemara says that Nasan Hanavi gave a mashal to David HaMelech to say, Uriah has one sheep, he has one wife, but why are you taking the one thing that he has? Why are you doing that? And there, what do we see? Mihava, was that actually real? Ela mashal ba'alma, hachanami mashal ba'alma. The Gemara pushes back again and says that was a mashal ba'alma, but in Cain, if you want to say that this is a mashal ba'alma, shmo b'shem iro lama. Over here, by the mashal that Nasan Hanavi gave, Hitaka didn't give names to people. And in the mashal, as it were, when the psukim are presenting, we see that Eov has the name of a city, and we see that Eov has a real name. A mashal could be without a name, or a mashal could be with Ploni Almoni. The fact that you're calling him Eov and you're saying he's from Utz, l'chora, he's a real person. So he didn't like this answer. Doesn't even get off the ground, really. It's presented and shot down pretty quickly, but it is still a shita. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, Damar Tarvayu, they said, Eov mi ole gole haya. He came up from Bavel, when the Jews came from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael. He was part of the travels. Not only that, ubeis midrash ubetveria haya. Wow, this guy had a base medrash. That's data. That's a data point.
Then how do you spin that with the fact that Moshe wrote the Sefer?
We're going to see soon that it's just a machlokas tanaim, but you can't. The Amoraim who held what they said about Moshe are not these Amoraim. They're all holding different tracks. It's not so simple. The Gemara says, Meisvei, hold on one second. You want to say that he was part of the Ole Bavel, but the Brisa says we're on the very bottom line of Tes Vav Amud Aleph. And just fair warning, be prepared, Boy Scouts. When we turn the page, don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Okay? Don't. Because that's what I did the whole day. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed. It says the Gemara Meisvei, Yumesh Nosef Shel Eov. How old was Eov? Misha shenichnesu Yisrael Mitzrayim v'ad sheyatzu. 210 years old. He was there. He was alive. He was born when the Jews went into Mitzrayim, and he died the year they left. Hold on one second. The question will become irrelevant in a moment. So the Gemara says, how can you say that he was part of the Ole Bavel? Hare, we see he was born the year they went into Mitzrayim, and he died the year they left. He lived 210 years. So as we turn to the top of Tes Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara says, no, I don't mean he was born and died in those kufas. I'm just saying how old he was. He was the same age of Ema Kimisha Shenichnesu Yisrael Mitzrayim v'ad Shashi. I'm just using them as bookends just to tell you how old he was. But no, by no means did he live at that time, and he could have been part of the Ole Bavel. Could be.
So they said he was 210 years old, but not necessarily.
I'll give you an example. Somebody asks a woman, how old are you? She says, I'm as old as the gap between the last two World Series of the Cubs. So she's using landmarks that people know. 210 was a number that people knew. 210, once people got out of Mitzrayim, how long were the Jews? We all know we're in 9 months of captivity for that. We know, we just have it in our head. So that they were using landmarks. It was just kind of a, that kind of a thing. How old is the state of Israel? What? I don't know. You're making a face. You got your hand up inquisitively. I just want to make sure you're good.
Well, I just don't understand because if every letter is so precious, why is there a whole thing instead of just saying a number?
Well, every letter is precious, but this is a brisa, so we're not. It's not chumash that we're.
I get it.
So the brisa is obviously trying to teach something, and I'm sure there are. I could make up, but I won't. But you can make up connections between the suffering of Eov and the suffering of the Jews. There's what to be said about it. But here I don't know why it is poetic the way it is, other than the very quick link of suffering. It could be that there's a link there, but they were just using it to say that he was 210 years old. Meisvei, top of Tes Bava Mud Beis. The Gemara is now going to get into whether or not Eov was a yid. It didn't even really cross my mind that Eov would have been a goy, but the Gemara has a big machlokas about it. Not only in the Amoraim, but in the Tanakh. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, Shiva Nuvim Nisnabu Umos Olam. There are 7 prophets that prophesied. Is that the right word? Prophesied? I think so. Prophesied for the Umos Olam. The Eluhem, Bilam, the Aviv, the Eov, Eliphaz HaTemani, Ubildad HaShuchi, the Tzofar HaNaamasi, the Eliyahu ben Barchel Habuzi. These are the 7. What does that tell you about Eov? That he's a goy. He's part of the Umos HaOlam. Says the Gemara, wait a second. Uletamech, one of the 7 doesn't fit in this category. Uletamech Elihu ben Barchel Lab Yisrael Hava. Of course he was a yid. V'haksiv mimishpachas Ram. We have other Mari Makomos that indicate he's from Mishpachas Ram. And a fascinating Rashi. Look at Rashi 5 lines into the page. And then in that Rashi of Elihu, go down 2 lines. The East Amrim Mishpachas Ram, Hainu Avraham. It was a short name. It was a shortened name, Elos Island. Avraham is too long. Ram, welcome to the club. Nice to meet you. Stamp. So, yeah, we still do the same things. Ram, as a final, yeah. I mean, this is like a family name, but it's the same thing. It's just, so the Gemara says that he is Mishpachas Ram. So we see that Elihu ben Barka El Habuzi is a yid. So maybe it's also the case that Eov is a yid. Ella, what is this list of 7? In Buye Inve Lumos Haolam. Really, this list is just simply saying that they are prophesying for the Umos Haolam. Hachanami, perhaps Eov was in Buye Inve Lumos Haolam. Well, that's fine. It's not that the list is a list of goyim. Some of them were goyim, but it's a list of prophets who serviced the non-Jews with prophecy. So that's a fine answer. Says the Gemara, Atu Kulu Nevi'e, Milo in Vuye Lumos Olam. All the Nevi'im said things to non-Jews. Yonah to Nineveh, he has a lot of stuff going on. Why would you assume that every single prophet's only servicing Jews? Says the Gemara, there's a difference. Hassam, when it comes to the average Navi, Ikr Nevi'u Sahula Yisrael. The average, the primary, I should say, the primary Nevuah is for a Yid. But Hacha, this list of 7 in the Brisa that we saw in the second line of this page, Hacha Ikr Nevi'u Sahula Umos Olam. The focal point of their Nevuah was if there's 70-30. In this case, the 70-30 is tilted toward the Umos Olam. So that's what's going on in this list. Meisvei, I can give you another very sharp proof one way or the other about Eov to see if he's a Yid or not. 10 lines down, Tes Vav Mid Beis. Chasid Haya B'Umos Ha'olam V'Eov Shemo. Oh my gosh, how much more clear can it be? You had a righteous person who was of the nations of the world, and his name was Eov. The Lo Ba La'olam El Kadei L'Kabel Scharo. And he only came to the world to get his schar. Hebi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Olav Yisurin. He had some Yisurin. Hiskil Mecharef U'Megadev. And then he started to blaspheme and to say not nice things to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then Kaf Allah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Schar B'Olam Hazeh. And once he started saying blasphemous things, he got more reward in this world in order to minimize his reward in the next world. So we see a very clear brisa, black on white, that Eov was a goy. Eov was part of the Umos Ha'olam. So how do we make all the Mari Makomos fit? After all, some are clearly that he's a Yid, and some are clear that he's not. Answer the Gemara, Tanoihi. It's really a machlokas Tanoim if he was a Yid. The Tanya. Rebbe Lazar Omer, Eov b'mei shvota shoftim haya. He lived in the times of Rus. That's the opening pasuk of Rus. He b'mei shvota shoftim. Shene'emar heinatem kulchem chazisim v'lama zeh hevel tehevalu. This is a pasuk that can be found in Eov. And we have this language of a generation that was hevel tehevalu. Eze dor shekulo hevel. What door was considered to be complete frivolousness? I would have thought it would have been ours, but the Gemara doesn't say that. It's not one of the options, only because it was written earlier What was the problem? What was going on in
If
this?
they were here looking around.
If
they'd
they
be
were
ready.
here, they would be maskim. I'll call myself a navi on that one. That's fine. Big problems. So it says the Gemara, what generation was Kulo? Hevel? The Omer is a Dor shel Shvot HaShoftim, and we'll see in a little bit that Shvot HaShoftim, if you look at the language in a more of a homiletical way, it's the judges who were being judged because the judges were being dishonest. It's like Springfield, right? You have like a lot of very dishonest people in politics. These people were being called to task. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha Omer, Iyo b'mei Achashverosh haya. We're going back now to the timing question. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said that he lived in the times of Achashverosh because Shne'emar, the pasuk says in Iyo Parak Mem Beis, V'lo nimsa nashim yafos kibnos Iyo b'chol haaretz. His daughters were the most beautiful women, beautiful daughters in the entire world. Zeu dor shenizbakshu bo nashim yafos. In what generation do we see in Tanakh that there was a search for beautiful women? Have Omer zedoro shel Achashverosh. Says the Gemara, first to the middle with lines. Ve'ima b'mei David v'chsi v'yivakshu na'ara yafa. The famed story from the beginning of Malachim, where he had cut the garment of Shaul in Sefer Shmuel. Now he was paying the punishment because he was not chas on the garment, and therefore the garments wouldn't keep him warm. So they were looking for a woman without the pasuk they referred to as a sochenes, that she could be a warmer to him. And that was Abishag Ashunami. So we see that it wasn't just in the times of Achashverosh that they were looking for a beautiful woman. They were also looking in the times of David. So the Gemara says, no. Hasam over there by David, that was Bechol Gvul Yisrael. But Hacha, in regards to the case of Achashverosh, that was Bechol Haaretz. And therefore that validates the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha that it's possible that Eov lived in the times of Achashverosh. Halfway down on the page, Tezvav Medbei, second of the middle with lines. Reb Nasan Omer, Eov bimei Malchus Shiva haya. He lived in the times of Malchus Shiva, which we'll soon see is the kingdom of Shiva. Shenemar, Vatipol Shiva Vatikachem, that they ended up taking the animals of Eov. V'chachamim Omer Eov bimei Kasdim haya, which was in the times of Nebuchadnezzar, that he lived in the times of the Kasdim, the Chaldeans. Shenemar Kasdim. Where are we? Kastim Samu Shlosha Roshim. We're not going to get into all the psukim. We'd spend all day if we were here analyzing all the psukim. You'll excuse me, but that's what the pasuk says, that he lived in the times of the Kasdim. V'yesh Omrim Eov bimei Yaakov haya. Some say that Eov lived in the times of Yaakov, preceding Moshe. So the Gemara says, not only that, V'dina Bas Yaakov Nasa. He was the husband of Dinah, Aisha, the daughter of Yaakov. Unbelievable. Why would we ever assume this? Because the pasuk says in Sefer Mishlei Kedaber Achas Hanevalos Tedaberi. In the Torah it says Ki Nevala Sab Yisrael when they violated Dinah. So we see Nevala and Hanevelos, and because of the word association, we therefore assume that perhaps Eov lived during the times of Yaakov. The Kulhu Tanoi, all the Shitos in the Tanaim Svir Luhu the Eov Mi Yisrael Hava Labar Miyesh Omrim. Every one of the Tanaim actually held that Eov was a Yid, except for the Yesh Omrim. Because the Isal Tadaitoch Me'umos Olam Hava, if we wanted to assume that he was a non-Jew, then Basra the Shachiv Moshe, after Moshe died, Misharia Shechina al Ovdei Kochavim. There are no Goyim who have the Hashras HaShechina on top. Nobody ever gets that anymore. After Moshe died, no Goyim can have Hashras HaShechina. How do we know? Because Amar Mar. Bikesh Moshe Shelo Tishra Shechina al Ovdei Kochavim v'nasam. Moshe made a request to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that when he dies, that the Shechina should not rest on non-Jews. And then he was given that promise. Shne'emar b'niflinu ani ve'amcha ayin sham in the psukim for the full picture, a pasuk in Shmos. Amar Rav Yochanan Doro shel Eov shatof b'zimahaya. The generation of Eov was saturated with promiscuity. Shne'emar heinatem kulchem chazisem. Everyone is looking, implying looking at things that they shouldn't be. And all of this is frivolousness. Uchsiv. And also we know in Shir HaShirim, which is the book of the mashal of all mashals, Shuvi Shuvi Hashulamis, Shuvi Shuvi V'neches Evach, where the nations of the world say to the Jews, "Let me have a good look at you. Let me just see how you look," and it's done in an inappropriate way. So the Gemara therefore assumes that the word Chazisem, which as a pasuk in Eov, is referencing the fact that the times of Eov was a very promiscuous time. Says the Gemara, why would you say that? The word Chazisem has a positive reference. Ema ben Nevuah, Tichsiv Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, one very well-known haftarah that Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos is that he's a seer, he's a navi. So why are you assuming something negative about the word chazisem to therefore conclude that Doro Shel Iyov was shatuf bezima, that it was saturated with promiscuity? Perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps the word chazisem is a reference to Nevuah. Says the Gemara, that would have been fine if that's all the pasuk said is Heinatem kulchem chazisem, but it doesn't. It continues. Im kain lama zeh hevel tevadu lamali. The rest of the pasuk, why do I need it? Obviously, it's extra. Therefore, it must be that we're talking about a generation that is saturated in promiscuity. Let's darshan the beginning of the pasuk from Sefer Rus. The Gemara says, Dor sheshofet es shofta. It's a generation where the judges were being judged. So you had this really awkward scenario where you'd go to Bezdin, and Bezdin would give you a psak, and people would bark right back at Bezdin. Omer lo tol kise mi bein shinechas, what should be the right language. Take that thing out of your teeth, meaning you have something stuck in your teeth, just a mashal. Stop doing these little averas. And Omer lo tol kore mi bein enecha, take the beam from in front of your eyes. He barked back to the dayan. We were dealing with very dishonest people. It was a time where they were pushing back on the dayan because they weren't honest people. Amar lo kaspecha hayolasigim. Amar lo sevacha mahol b'mayim. The dayanim would say to them, your money is tied up in thorns, and they'd say back, your wine is watered down with water, which is again in our generation, all of our wine is watered down with water, but in their generation it was like an insult of sorts. And the point is all the same. That's what bimei shvot hashoftim means. That we're talking about a generation where the judges were being judged. Next, and a very small interruption, 3/4 of the way down. Where are we? 2 lines before the very wide lines on Tes Vav Amud Beis. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Kol ha'omer Malkas Shiva Isha Paisa. Anyone who says that Malkas Shiva is a reference to Queen Sheba, as we would call in our parlance, that's not correct. Eino elatoa. My Malkas Shiva. What do we mean when we say Malkas Shiva? Says the Gemara, Malchusa de Shiva, the kingdom of Shiva. So it was about the Malchus of, not about the Malchusa. It wasn't the queen of. It was just the kingship of, the kingdom of. All right, let's get into it. Now we're going to get into the story of Eov, based on the Psukim and Eov and the drashas of the Gemaras, of what actually happened to him and how he became the paradigm for suffering. Last of the middle width lines. Vayhi hayom vayavo b'nehu Elokim v'yisyatzev al Hashem vayavo gam asaten b'socha. All the angels were coming to talk to Hashem. Some of them, before Hashem, right? It was Yom Kippur. And the Satan was there as well. Vayomer Hashem ala Satan me'ayin tavo. Where are you coming from? Vayan ha-Satan. And he answers, and then for some reason the Gemara leaves this out, and I couldn't tell you why, that basically there's more going on. It's mishot ba'aretz mishalech ba. I was scouring the earth. And Amar lefana, the Satan says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shalom, Shatati b'chol ha'olam kulam. I've traveled the whole world over, and I've looked at everybody. Lo matzasi neman ka'abdecha Abraham. I've never found anyone quite like Abraham. Shamar talo, you said to him, Kumi salech ba'arz la'orko l'rachba ki l'cha etnena. Where the pasuk says that I want you Abraham, to go travel the world to its length and to its width. It's all yours. Ve'afilu hachi, even though he did this, b'shah shalom matzamakum likvor asara ad shekana b'dala mea shekel kesev. Even when he couldn't find a place to bury his wife, lo here achar midosecha. He didn't flinch. He didn't have any problems at all, still trusting him, no problem at all. So then the Gemara says, Vayomer Hashem el Satan, Hasam talibcha el abdi Eov, ki ein kamo ba'aretz. Nobody's like Eov, which is an unbelievable comment. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yochanan gadol hanemar b'Eov yoser mima shenemar ba'Avram. There was even greater information said by Eov than there was by Abraham. How so? The pasuk says by Abraham one accolade, which is the accolade of Yirei Elokim. However, uve Eov ksiv ishtam v'yashar Yirei Elokim v'sar meira. This guy's got a book report all about him. Eov has a higher list of accolades than Avraham Avinu. Sounds like kfira, where it's like so difficult for us to understand. So difficult. So the Gemara says, "My visar meira." What is this accolade of Eov that he was able to remove bad things? Amar Rabbi Abba bar Shmuel, Io vatran b'mamonohaya. This language of sar me ra is actually a playoff of the word of rea, of friends. What does this mean? Normally, a particular food or a service was paid for half of a pruta, and Io vitra mishalo, he gave the whole pruta. He gave even more. He was very generous. It's not really sor me ra, it's really from the word rea. That's what some of the proportions say. Anyways, the point is that Io was a remarkable person. So then the Satan says back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, 7 lines from the bottom on Tes Vav Amud Beis. Vayana Satan es Hashem, vayomer hachinom yirei oyev Elokim, halo ata sachta va'ado va'ad beso, you've given the guy everything. My ma'aseh yoda berachta. What does it mean? And we didn't see this because it was truncated from the Gemara itself, but it's actually part of the pasuk we were just reading. What does it mean that his ma'aseh yoda was barachta, that his handiwork was blessed? So the Gemara says, Amar of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak kol anotel pruta me Iyov misbarich. Anyone who took a coin from Iyov was blessed. Mayu mikneu paratz baretz, that his flocks were parats, they went throughout the lands. What does this mean? So Amar Rav Yossi Reb Chanina mikneu shel Iyov partsu gidro shel olam. They broke the typical rules of flocks out there in the world. How so? Minhago shel olam ze'evim horgim ha'izim. Normally, wolves eat sheep. Miknehu shel Iyov izim horgim esazevim. There was something miraculous happening, that the sheep were killing all of the wolves. Unbelievable. Whoever would have thought. Okay, then the pasuk says, "Ve'ulam shlachna yadcha v'gab b'chol asher lo imlo al panecha yivarechecha." So what the Satan says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, "Look, Hashem, yeah, of course Iyov is doing. He's wealthy. He's got a perfect family. Everything's great. Everything he touches, turns into gold. Of course, he's one of the best. But we have to pressure test him in order to make sure that he's the real deal." So the Gemara therefore says that Satan says to Hashem, you got to test him. And let's see if when everything is bad, if he's still in the category of Yivarechecha, that he will bless you. Of course, this is a euphemism, and what it means is that he will curse you. We just don't like saying those words. So Vayomer Hashem ala Satan, Hashem gives a little rope to the Satan. And he says, Hine kol asher lo biyodcha, rak elav al tishlach yodcha. Anything of his possessions you can touch, but you can't touch him. Okay, Satan goes to work. The sons and daughters are eating in the house. That the bakar were chorshos, and the rest of the pasuk says So right after plowing, the pasuk says that there was rows that they were harvesting. So it says the Gemara, that there was something miraculous taking place with the world of Iyov. Why? What was happening that was miraculous? And we'll soon see that the Satan was going to mess around with all of this. Last line of Tes Vav Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yochanan Melamed Shehit Imu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Iyov Me'ein Olam Haba. And Rashi at the top of the page says, what is the Me'ein Olam Haba that Iyov experienced? So the top Rashi says, Me'ein Olam Haba K'dichsiv Har V'yoledes Yachtav Herayon V'Leida B'Yom Echad. Conception and birth was in the same day. The gestational period was dropped by a good couple 100 days. Done. So that was a little bit about what he was experiencing and what the Satan was up against. This guy had a wonderful life. So the Gemara says on the top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're going to go to what?
What did it have to do with them drinking wine? Is that just part of the story?
Yeah. Well, no, not him drinking. His kids were drinking. Yeah. Well, that's going to come up in a minute. Okay. And then the pasuk says on the top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, Od zeh medaber b'zeh. One person is talking, another one comes in. Vayomer Isha Elokim. Od zeh medaber b'zeh ba. Vayomer kastim samu shlosha roshim v'yipshetu sagmal v'yikachum. There was a problem with the animals. Od zeh medaber b'zeh ba. Vayomer banechem v'nosecha ochlim shosim yain b'veisachem abechbor. They were eating. V'nei ruach gedola ba me'ever hamidbar. There was a huge windstorm. V'higa ba'arba pinos sabais v'yipol al anarm. All the kids died. That's the reference, Rob, that you saw in the pasuk earlier. And then, how did Iyov respond? Remember what the Satan negotiated with Hashem. The Satan said, let me do some damage, and let me see how he responds. Again, pressure testing. Vayakam Iyov, vayikra es me'ilo, he tore his clothing, which is the din, that we have to tear kriya upon the loss of an immediate family member, and even according to some of the Gedolei Hador. Vayag is this Rosho, and he shaved his head. He sheared his head. Vayomer aram yatsasim ibeten imi, aram ashu, shema Hashem nosan ve'Hashem lakach, yishem Hashem mevorach. almost like a textbook answer of a Rebbe. It just really just such a powerful, succinct, perspective-oriented response. No flaws. And then it was the next Yom Kippur, or the next time that the upper courts were meeting. I don't know, we don't know what we're talking about here, by the way, because this is like a dialogue between the Satan and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So I don't want anyone to feel like I'm making any sense.
So sad.
Right. I don't want anyone to think that I know what I'm talking about here. I'm just translating. Vayomer Hashem el Satan, Emi zetavo bayan. That's where you're coming from. Bayan Satan. Es Hashem vayomer mishot ba'aretz. I was traveling over the world and doing my skira achas. I'm going to see what everybody's like. The Gemara says, Amar Lafani, he repeated himself, Ribono Shel Olam, Shadti b'chol olam, v'lo matzasi kavdech Avram. He doubles down. It's the same thing he said last Yom Kippur, or whatever this day, the particular day was. Last of the short lines, which is scary, I know, but last of the short lines on Tez Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, She'amarta lo, the Satan still talking to Hashem. You said, Kum yisalech ba'aras, arko l'rachba, kilchad nena. You gave Avram everything. Even when he didn't have a place to bury his wife. He wasn't mahar harachim dosech. He didn't do any. He didn't question you. And then, Vayomer Hashem el Satan hasamta libcha l'abdi Iyov. Oh, you pushed me last time about Iyov. You took away some of his wealth. You took away his kids, and nothing. He said Yishem Hashem avorach. He's a firm guy. So says the Gemara, Ki ein kamo ba'aretz. Lo denu machzik betumaso, v'tisiseni bo levalo chinam. And the Gemara says a crazy line. It's not the Gemara. It's a pasuk in Iyov. Kodesh Baruch Hu says to the Satan, and you made me do these things to him that didn't even need to be done. So says Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ilmale mikra kasu b'yafshar la'omra. How in the world could anybody say that the Satan convinced Hashem to do something that wasn't deserving? That's why he says, ilmale mikra kasu. If the Torah didn't write it, if the Mishnah didn't write it, if Iyov didn't write it, it couldn't have been written. Ka'adam shemasisin osovanise. Someone's trying to convince Hashem, and he's convinced. He's not convincible. He's Hashem. So again, this whole dialogue is Omer Dorsheni. There's so many layers and levels, and we are learning the top layer, maybe. The Gemara says, "B'masni satana." This is a terrifying idea. It's a very mature idea and hard to swallow. 4 lines into the wide lines. B'masni satana, yoredu maseh. The Satan goes down and he makes people make mistakes. And then after they make mistakes, v'ola umargis. Then the Satan goes up to the heavens and he stirs the pot and says, oh, look what Karesh did. Look what Rob did. And then no till Rishus, no till Neshama. It's 10 words, but it's extremely powerful. It's actually 8 words. Not that that makes it any better or worse, but a very short idea. But the point is, and we have this principle as we've seen earlier in Shas, no rational person would ever do an Aveira, even if you're just hedging. If the chances are that the Torah might be true, it's not worth doing an Aveira because of this. What are you gambling against, right? What's the other option that's so lucrative that you're willing to do an Aveira for? Nothing. It's not like the Aveira is a mitzvah in another religion. It's just an Aveira stop. There's no to'elas in the Aveira. The only reason a person would ever do an Aveira is if something broke in their brain. It doesn't make any sense why a person would ever do an Aveira. And that's what's happening over here. The Gemara is just calling it out. The Satan comes down here, he stirs the pot, gives you whatever it is, your Hurim, a Yetzer Hara, this or that. I'm in a WhatsApp group with Moalim, and this Moal, he's stark. So he wanted to have all the mothers and fathers of the baby wear this like very high cut gown for sterile environment where the mothers are not drunk. I'm like, what about the other 26 people in the room? Are you handing out gowns for everybody? No, today I walked into the house for a bris. Frutza. So I pashat daven that I should be strong. It's just she wasn't dressed properly, That the world doesn't work that way. We have to be able to be strong in this. We don't look for these challenges. We don't look for them. We want to be stark. We want to be fruit. But this is what the Gemara says. It's nice that I learned this Gemara today. Yoredu maseh, ve'ola umargis, no tel rishus, no tel neshama. Now, one of the implications here is that he can't be no tel neshama without rishus. Not an implication. It's black on white. Kodesh Baruch Hu is the final machri. The Malach HaMaves can't kill without permission. The pasuk says 5 lines down into the wide lines. Vayan hasatan es Hashem v'yomer or be'ad or b'chol asher leish yitain be'ad nafsho. Look, the guy's still intact. Ulam shlachna yodcha v'gal atzmo. Let's talk about him himself. El bisaro imlo panecha yivarechecha, and maybe he'll curse you out then. You still haven't pressure tested him enough, says the Satan to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, difficult to understand, but Hashem acquiesces. Vayomer Hashem ala Satan, hino biyadcha ach es nafsho shemor. You can do to him as you wish, but you can't kill him. Vayetzei Satan meis pnei Hashem. The Satan leaves. Vayach es iyo v'gomer, and he gives him all of these illnesses. And the Gemara inserts a line here. I don't know what to tell you. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Koshe Tzaros Shel Satan Yoser Mishel Iyo. The difficult challenge of the Satan was worse than the punishments of Iyo. Why? Yes, but not.
Heard that?
Yes, but that's not quite it. Not yet. The Gemara says, "Mashal le'eved she'amar lo Rabo shvor chavis u'shmor es yena." He says, "I need you to break the barrel, but I can't have you waste any of the wine." Which Rashi?
Tzaro shel Satan, third line.
Third line. Shehuz kaklis more than nefesh es nefesh yav shelo tetzeh. That's what the Gemara says, black and white here. Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't this hurts me more than it hurts you. It's that you're asking me to do the impossible. It's striking the balance of putting someone in such tremendous sorrow,
To the brink, but
bringing them to the brink, but without actually killing them. So says the Gemara, that is the mashal. Amar Reish Lakish, hu Satan hu Yetzer Hara hu Malach HaMaves. The Satan is the Yetzer Hara, and that is the same as the Malach HaMaves. They're all the same entities. They're all the same entity. Who Satan? How do we know this? That was the pasuk we just saw 3 lines ago. Who Yetzer Hara? Ksiv Hasam rak olayom ksiv hacha rak elav al tishlach yadcha. So we see the language of rak. And then the Gemara says, "Hu malach hamavet tichsiv ach es nafsho shemor." Alma b'didei kaima. It seems to be that he does have some kind of control. Rashi, Alma b'didei kaima, 4th line. Litol es hanefesh, these hiru shelo litla. This is difficult with the previous Gemara that we saw, that he is not allowed. Again, it was an insert. It was a brisa on the 4th line that said no tel rishus no tel neshama. It's not so pashut that agrees with the line that we just saw. Okay. Now the Gemara takes the hashkafa level up to the next level. We're about halfway down, a third of the way down, I should say. We have about 15 more lines for tonight. The Gemara says, Amar Reb Levi, Satan upnina. Yikes. That's not. That's a bad start to a story. Satan upnina. Satan and Pnina was Chana, the other wife of Shmuel. So the Gemara says, L'shem shamayim niskavnu. When the Satan is ruining our lives and making us do things that we should not be doing, or at least being the instigator, and Penina, who was referred to as a tzira, that's how we referred to her in all of Maseches Yevamos, as the other wife, the co-wife. So there, they were always L'shem Shamayim. Satan, Kevan dechazia leHaKadosh Baruch Hu, denatya daite basar iyo. Once the Satan saw that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was showing some kind of favoritism to Iyo, Omar, Chas v'shalom, min shilei l'rachmanus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to forget the Avraham. That's dangerous for the Jewish people. The zechuyos of Avraham are so strong, and we had to make sure that Avraham was brought back to the forefront. Penina d'chsi b'chiyasta tzarasa gam kasba v'or ima. What did she make Chana upset for? So that she would daven harder, and she did, and she had Shmuel. Again, this totally turns the stories of Tanakh on their heads. It wasn't a bad thing. It was the appearance of a bad thing. It was a louder bark than bite. It was just to create an outcome. We just didn't want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forget about Abraham, because we now benefit from the zechuyos of Abraham, and we needed Penina to cheper Chana so Chana would daven harder and get Shmuel at Tzaddik. So the Gemara says, Darsha Rav Acha Bar Yaakov v'Papunya, Asa Satan Nashke Lekare. He says that when this drush of Rav Levi was said, the Satan came and kissed him on the feet. He said, "You understand me now. You understand me now."
It's a good thing, I don't know.
Yeah. It reminds me of the daily, multiple daily admissions that we say. We're supposed to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with our Yetzer Tov, and we're also supposed to serve him with a Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, the Gemara says here straight up, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, and the Malach HaMaves are the same. He's there to help us, which is really hard. He's there to make us stumble, but the stumbling can help us. Nishpashu. B'chol zo says the Gemara lo chata Eov b'svaso. Even though he was afflicted with all the physical ailments that he was afflicted with, the Gemara does not detail them. Nothing. His mouth was perfect. Amar Rava, b'svatzav lo chata, but belibo chata. He says, I'm going to make a diuk. Rava says, it's true. His words were perfect. He put on a really good show, but in his heart, he was chote. Maika Amar. What was the pasuk that showed us that he was a little bit deviant in his heart? The pasuk says, Eretz nitna v'yad rasha, pnei shoptei yechaseh, imlo efo mihu. Basically, in short, that the world is now being run by the Rishayim. It's being run not by Hashem. This was like a remez, almost, to the fact that he was an unhappy camper. And Amar Rava, bikesh Eov lafoch ke'ara al piha. He wanted to flip the bowl on its head, which basically means he wanted to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wasn't in charge. That's what Rava felt, but Abaye didn't agree. Amar le Abaye, lo diber Eov ela keneged asata. He wasn't saying that there is no Hashem and that it's just a world of evil. He was just talking about the Satan. So lav dafka that he was being a kofer and he was being mahafech hasakara. We would never judge anyway. So it's not a judgment. What he went through is incomparable for any of us to even comprehend. So says the Gemara, we don't really know. Is Rava right that really Eov did something wrong and he was mahapech hasakara? Or was Abaye right that no, the pasuk that speaks about Eretz Nitna B'yad Rasha was talking only about the Satan? Says the Gemara, Ketanai. This is Taka Amachlo Kestanai. The Gemara says Eretz Nitna B'yad Rasha. Rabbi Lazar Omer Bikesh Eov Lafoch Ke'ara Al Pia, exactly like Rava says. Amar Lo Yehoshua, Rabbi Yehoshua Lo Diber Eov Ela Klape Satan, which is exactly what Abaye says. So we see it's a Machlokes Tanaim. If Eov was able to withstand the temptation to blaspheme HaKadosh Baruch Hu with everything that he went through. The pasuk says, Al dadcha lo ersha ve'ein miyadcha matzil. What does this pasuk mean? Amar Rava bikesh Eov liftor es kol ha'olam kula min adin. He wanted to say that anytime anyone fails, it was Hashem's fault. How so? Amar lefanav ribono shalom barasa shor parsosav sedukos. You created a shore, a cow that has split hooves. Barasa chamor parsosav kilutos. You created a donkey that has sealed hooves. Barasa Gan Eden, Barasa Gehenim, Barasa Tzadikim, Barasa Rishayim. Mima Akev Al Yadcha. You created me. If I'm doing something wrong, it's not because of me. You created me. We're throwing it back on Hashem. You made me with my Yetzer Hara. All my flaws are your flaws. It says the Gemara. Umaya Hadru Lechabre de Eov. And with this, we're going to close. What did Eov's friends say back to him? The pasuk says, Af ata tofer yira. There's a hafara. There's a relinquishing of your yira. The tigra sicha lifnei kel. And you've reduced your speech in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yetzer Hara. Bara lo Torah Tavlet. Is that when a person finds themselves in the throes of the Yetzer Hara, the response is not, say Eov's friends to Eov, that you throw your hands up and say it's all Hashem's fault. You got to go find Torah. What are you expecting? You're expecting to not be immersed in the manual of instructions in this world and to be successful. Pasha, that's not true. Even if we knew all of halacha, we would fail miserably without learning Musar. We need to be immersed. We need to be saturated in learning because Baruch Kodesh Baruch Hu Yitzhar, Baruch Torah Tablet. Well, I mean, arguably, if you wanted to play the other card, it could be a Ben Noach, and Birkas Hashem is also.
Right, top.
Oh,
You are correct.
Yeah.
But Barasilo to a top.
Yep, that's true. There's only one sheet in the end of the day. There's just one Yeshomrim that we saw, but this is another good ride. All right, we're going to stop right here. We'll pick up tomorrow night, Emir Hashem, with Darash Rava. We'll, Emir Hashem, get to the Perek, and then as mentioned, on Shabbos, we'll learn Yud Zayin Amid Beis and Ches with David. All right, wishing you all a beautiful night.